I'm currently working on this lovely, lovely horse. It's part of a quadruple portrait. And I thought it would be really useful because I've had a lot of people asking me about the colours that I've used for, well, all of them really, but particularly for this really bright bay. And that's what I want to talk about today, is the layering process and the colours that I've used, and almost my formula for picking the colours and then layering them in different ways, I guess, to get the colour that I'm wanting and the effect that I'm wanting. Now, I'm working on the dark grey pastel mat, so that's something that we have to take into effect because it's a dark colour. When we put the first layer on, it's never going to be as vibrant as you want it, so we have to think about that. We have to think about the colours that we want to bring in to increase the vibrancy. So the colours that I'm using on this, there's a range of them, particularly for this sort of very bright bay area in here. I'm using predominantly these pencils here. So you've got a range of colours. We've got the obvious oranges, so I've got the polychromos terracotta here. I've got the cadmium orange polychromos. I've got the burnt sienna. I've got the caput mortem violet, and I've got the Indian red. I've also got the light yellow ochre in here as well, which is again incredibly useful just for bringing out a little bit of a glow. And then I've got the light fast Mars black, which I've found to be again really, really useful in some of these darker areas. So I'm tending to start with the terracotta. That's the pencil that I'm tending to put down first. Now that might seem a little bit odd because I do talk about putting the lightest colour down first, but for me the terracotta is actually the closest mix to what I'm wanting out of this horse's coat. But of course there's not just this colour in there, there's all sorts of different tones in there. So for me to put this down first is actually, this is a good bet. It's a good starting point. When I'm doing something like this, I tend to use relatively blunt pencil. Nice light pressure, enough pressure so that you're getting the colour onto the surface of the paper. Because I'm not looking at any details or anything like that within the fur, so I'm not really looking at any of the hair strokes. I'm using these round pencil strokes, so I'm getting a smooth laydown of colour right from the beginning. So I'm just going to go round and round, just move that over there a little bit, round and round. They're quite big pencil strokes as well, they're not sort of like little tiny ones. I'm just getting that rough colour down onto the surface. Usually if I was working with an animal that had got quite a lot of texture in the fur, I would be being quite careful about following the fur direction, that kind of thing. With this, because I'm not being overly detailed with any of that, it's not really a problem. So as long as I've got a smooth lay down, that's all that matters really. So I'm just going to bring a little bit more of this orangey colour through. You can see the difference, or you know, where I've brought in more layers in here and here, you can see the difference to this, just this plain orange. So this is the first colour that I'm going to be putting down to get this lovely rich bay colour. I'm also not really looking at the details of where all of the shadows and everything like that are going, because this orange still needs to go underneath there. It needs to be in those areas where all of those shadowy bits are. So I'm just bringing that into there. It's very rough. You can definitely see the pastel mat through the layer of colour. If that's not an issue at this point at all, because we're just putting the first layer in. That's something to really be aware of when you're using pastel mat, is that, you know, your grain does show through, probably until you get to sort of like layer 3 or 4, and it's not something to you know, to be worried about or stress about. So the next colour I'm going to bring on is I think the Indian red. Now I'm saying I think because I could change my mind and bring like the burnt sienna or something like that on, but I'm just going to bring the Indian red in over the top of the terracotta, and what will happen is it will just mix nicely with that orangey colour, and I can then bring another layer of the terracotta over the top just to strengthen and bring out the saturation. You can see, even though the terracotta is quite a strong colour, that first layer doesn't really show up very much at all, because I want to use nice light pressure. I don't want to, you know, go in with really hard pressure at this stage. It shows up as really quite sort of pale and a bit insipid. But once you start bringing these extra layers in, it really starts to come and you know, look really nice and vibrant and saturated. So the Indian red is a fantastic colour to bring in with your oranges. It kind of just makes them all a little bit more, it's like adding a burnt orange in there. It just really helps you know, get a little bit more richness out of the colour. So I'm just, again, just round and round with my circles. All I'm trying to do at the moment is just add colour. I'm just trying to add lots and lots of layers so that I can then smooth it out and add detail where I want to add detail. The detail comes in the form of the value changes, so everywhere where there's like a little bit of light or there's a little bit of dark, that's where my details are going to come through. They might be very obvious, like this area here, very obvious. They might be a lot more subtle, this area here, and this lighting up here behind the ear. I haven't finished this bit here, that's sort of a little bit of pinkiness up there. So I'm just going to come through into here as well. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a cotton bud just to smooth everything out, but I don't want to use it just yet because the tip of the cotton bud will actually take some of the pigment off the surface, and I want to kind of minimise that, so I want to get a few layers in before I add the cotton bud basically. And the cotton bud I literally just use very gently just to sort of smear the colours together. Works beautifully on the pastel mat, works really nicely on the pastel mat. So I never use any mineral spirits or blending agents or powders or anything like that on any of my work. I just use pure colour pencil. So again, got a bit of a mark there, but again it doesn't matter. So you can see we're just building this area up here. It all looks a bit rough and ready, but we're not worrying about that. We're just wanting to get this lovely base layer in. Coming through here, and of course with the pastel mat, it's so forgiving. We could put a colour in and it not work, so then we just put a layer over the top of it and get rid of it, and it all becomes part of the finished piece really. And it's a very nice surface to blend on. I think what puts people off is the fact that it is so toothy, and that when you get to this stage here, it just looks really rough. And I think, you know, what people forget is that you really do have to add the layers. To get realism with coloured pencil, you've got to add the layers in. There's no getting around it. You have to add the layers in. Even if you do decide to use a blending agent or, you know, something like that, you've still got to get the layers in, otherwise that doesn't work either. So there's no shortcuts. You've got to do the work. Okay, so that's my layer of the Indian red, and you can see on my pencil there, and we can see we've got a really sort of nice flat area. I don't use sharp pencils at all when I'm doing something like this, because I don't want my pastel mat to get any scratches or anything like that, which can very easily happen on pastel mat because it is such a delicate surface. So I'm going to come back in again with my terracotta over the top. So we've got terracotta first, we've got Indian red next. I'm going to come back in again with my terracotta. I'm just going to come in over the top, and you'll see what happens straight away is that the colours start to blend together really nicely. We start to get a little bit more smoothness in there, and the colour becomes much richer. With pastel mat, getting your lighter colours in over the top of dark works really beautifully. To be honest, these, yeah, you'd say that the Indian red was darker than the terracotta, absolutely. So this is sort of like putting light over the top of dark, and the colours mix really nicely, and we're starting to get that really lovely, strong, deep, rich orange colour that is predominantly what this horse's colour is. So I'm just going to come down here. Colour recipes, I think, are something that you will find your favourites, basically. I get an awful lot of requests for you know, can you choose some colours for me? Can you help me choose colours? What colours would you use for this particular dog or cat or horse or whatever? And I'm always really, really happy to help. But a good formula to use is the choose your lightest colour, choose your darkest colour, choose your mid-tone. Now that could be overall. It could be you're looking at the overall piece and you go with light, dark, mid. Or it could be that you just work on, you know, specific areas, and there again you would choose your dark, light, mid. And then what you'd do is you'd choose colours that work in between those. So you'd use some complementary colours. So with your oranges, what works really well actually is green, works incredibly well. Purples work beautifully with the oranges, particularly the more yellowy oranges. They work really, really nicely. Violets work incredibly well. And of course your reds and pinks. Pinks work really, really beautifully too. So I'm going to come into here. I want to add a little bit more vibrancy in here, a little bit more lighter. So I'm going to use my cadmium orange here. And I'm just going to come in places, not all over, just in places where I just want to sort of brighten and lighten. I want to add a little bit more brightness in this area here where we've got the that sort of big muscle sort of bulging through. You can see still I'm being quite scribbly. I'm being quite, I guess, not sort of non-committal really. I'm not being really, really, really careful with my colour. I'm just whacking it in really. It's coming through here. And again, this is helping to blend and smooth. I do apologise for the the sound in the background. It's the puppy in her cage. When I'm doing recordings like this, I've got to be quite careful to keep her in her crate, because otherwise she just races around the room and it's impossible to record. So she's in her crate, but she's eating a pig's ear. So that's what the noise is, if you can hear it. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I want to bring in the cotton bud just to show you how I just sort of blend everything together and smooth everything out. I'm going to use really, really light pressure and I'm going to kind of go in sort of all the same direction. What should happen is you'll start to get rid of any graininess. And because we've got a few layers in there, my voice is going now. Because we've got a few layers in there, the colour isn't lifting off. If we've got too few layers, then what can happen is you can see the colour lifts off onto the cotton bud. What happens is the pigment will just brush off. I also quite a lot of the time use a little soft brush as well to help with blending and smoothing and all of that kind of thing, but that brushes off your pigment an awful lot more easier. It literally brushes it off the surface. So just be really, really careful with that. So you could use a paper stump, but I find the cotton bud works better than anything really. So I'm just going to come through there. And you can see very easily we've got a beautiful, you know, the colours matching. I'd started all of this beforehand. We've just brought a few layers in there. Very quickly we've got this lovely, lovely dark colour. So then we can start, because it's on pastel mat, we can start to bring in a little bit of this lighter colour in here. We've got a little bit of sort of a highlight coming over the top of that muscle. And a couple of colours that I like to use. So I think the Granite Rose Pablo is a really good one. And I've also been using the Ash Rose Holbein, which has been really super as well. Very similar in colour. The Ash Rose is just a little bit duller. And all you do is you just kind of come in, particularly on the pastel mat, because we can do light over dark. And I just bring in this sort of very gentle highlight through into here. Again, I'm not taking a huge amount of care here. I'm just sort of thinking about where this highlight's going, thinking about how the curve is working, and just pulling that through into there. So we've got that little bit of a highlight, and like I say, I need to work on that. That's too light at the minute. We need to sort that out. And I also need to work a little bit more on the mane. I've got to get these more refined and these shadows and everything in here properly. So these are still quite rough. I need to go into those and refine them more. But I kind of needed the neck area, you know, to be in. I've sort of done both of them at the same time, just so that I can work the shadows in where I need to, and I can see where the bits of mane are falling onto the neck. So it's, for me, working on something like this where I've got one colour falling onto another, I tend to work on them at a similar amount of time. I don't finish one and then do the other bit. You know, I tend to kind of work them in. So I've worked on this, then I've come and worked on this, then I'll be working back onto this, and then I'll be working back onto this. So for me, it's all kind of, you know, it all happens all at once, really. So just bringing a little bit of that light in. You can see it's starting to get a bit grainy again, which is fine. It's just picking up the grain of the pastel mat. But we're starting to get a nice sort of area of sheen in there. You know, and this is where the detail comes in. So it's not that I'm putting all of the hairs of the horse in, it's that I'm bringing all of the different lighting aspects in, the lights and the darks in. And that's what's going to make it look realistic, and it's going to make it look 3D. And it's something that I talk about all of the time whenever I'm teaching, that importance of your darks and your lights overrides any importance of colour. Colour obviously is lovely, and it's lovely to have, and when you get something as vibrant as this, it's beautiful to draw, and it's important. Obviously we're drawing a portrait, and we need to, you know, we need to make sure that what we're drawing is the horse that we're drawing. But it's not the colour. I think people think it's the colour and the details that make the realism, but it's not. It's the light and the dark, it's your values, it's how you reproduce your shadows and how you reproduce your highlights. And your highlights aren't necessarily these bright, bright, bright highlights here. They're, you know, areas that are really quite subtle, like in the face area here. We've got some really lovely, subtle highlights in here, which are beautiful, but they're not bright white, you know. We haven't even got a catch light in the eye, but it still works really, really nicely. So it's not about, you know, lights being bright, bright, bright white. It's about having them in the correct ratio to your shadows. And it's something every single time you see me drawing, you'll hear me talk about that. It's so, so, so important. Okay, so I'm just going to come down here just a little bit. I like to use pinks in my oranges, particularly in my highlights. I think they work really well, really nicely. I'm going to be working, well, I am working on some new bits and pieces which I think are going to be really useful. I was talking to Vicky this morning, and we were both talking about how sometimes it can be really awkward when you're choosing colours, particularly when you're a beginner and you use something like you know, an app to choose your colours. There's all sorts of apps out there that you can choose your colours from, and it's great because, you know, you don't know what colours to pick, and then you go onto this thing and you drop a dropper on, and the colour app will say, oh, these are the colours that you need to use. But the majority of the time, the colours are very strange combinations. And what it does is it just gives you that little bit too much of a crutch that you're not learning how to pick your own colours. And I think learning how to pick your own colours is crucial. I think it's really, really key. And it isn't something that's, you know, sort of very secretive, or I don't even think it's that hard to do. When I first started drawing, if I was going to draw a horse like this, I'd go, right, which is the closest colour? Which is the closest colour to this horse? Oh, it's terracotta. Right, I'm going to use terracotta. And the more I drew, the more I see, the more I kind of saw the different colours. And the more I experimented and had a play. And I think that is where the emphasis should be on. Just have a go, see what happens. Nothing has to be perfect. And I honestly think that the colour pencil picker apps, they almost encourage perfection. They almost encourage people to be, I need to have it spot on to my drawing. I need to get this colour identical to the drawing on the photograph. These colours here aren't identical to my photograph. They're you know, they're pretty near, but it doesn't matter. that they're not absolutely identical. What matters is that I've got the shaping correct, I've got the eyes in the right place, and I've got my values in there. That's what really matters, and that's why I want to sort of help people with formulas and, you know, an idea of, you know, look here first, look, pick this colour first, where you can see where it's the lightest colour, pick that one first, and just go, right, okay, so that's sort of like a really pale in here, really, well, it's this kind of colour, this sort of pinky, pale pinky colour. This colour down here, it's a very, very rich sort of reddy, orangey colour. So it's probably a mixture of these two, burnt sienna and the terracotta in here. And once you start to experiment and play around with your colours and just go, do you know what, I'm just going to have a go and see what happens. Then that's when you start to learn. That's when you start to remember your colour choices that have worked. And that's when you pick up another drawing and you start to do a different subject, you will then remember what worked on your last ones, and you'll then be going, oh, well, hang on a second. This German Shepherd that I'm doing here, they've got this beautiful orangey bit. Do you know what? The terracotta and the Indian red worked amazingly. And then I put a little bit of pink in for, you know, a highlight or a sheen on the coat. That worked beautifully, so I'm going to use that again. And I think these things that are meant to help us, and they do help us, of course they help us, and they are brilliant, but they're also kind of send us backwards a little bit. They end up making us try and get things so spot on to the photograph. And we need to get away from that. We need to get away from being perfect, having everything absolutely spot on. It's not necessary. And it causes all sorts of problems. You know, I get people sending me emails going, I just can't get this right, Bonny. And I'll read the email and I think, oh, blimey, what are they going to be sending me here? This sounds like it's horrendous. I'll bring the drawing up and it will be astonishingly brilliant. And I'll be thinking, why am I seeing something completely different to them? And it will be because the colour isn't spot on, or I haven't quite got this exactly the same as the photograph. And to me, that makes me quite sad, because I want people to really enjoy their drawing. I want people to absolutely love what they're doing. And, you know, to be so hung up on trying to get everything exactly the same as a photo, I think it destroys people's confidence, for one, you know, and I don't think it makes the art of drawing particularly enjoyable, because there's always this sort of cloud hanging over, you know, whoever it is that's drawing, that they have to get everything absolutely perfect. And I really want to help people kind of steer away from the perfection. And enjoy their drawing and understand that they can mix their colours and just have everything working so nicely. So I'm just going to pop a little bit of the Mars Black into here just before I finish this little video. I'm using really light pressure. What I find with the Derwent Light, this is a Derwent Light Fast pencil. What I find with the Derwent Light Fast is when I use them in over the top of other colours, they can go incredibly grainy, particularly on the pastel mat. You can see all of the grains coming back out here. They're pretty opaque pencils. They are really good at that coverage. So I'm making sure that I'm using very, very light pressure, and I'm going to use another pencil in over the top. It's going to be another Polychromos that I'm going to use over the top just to sort of smooth everything out again and get rid of the graininess. But I really like this Mars Black in over the top of these orangey colours, just because it's a great match. It's a great match for these colours. You could use burnt sienna and the black over the top. I don't have a problem using black at all. I know some artists kind of steer clear of using black. I think black's a fantastic colour to use for drawing black things. Mixed in with other colours, but you know, I wouldn't steer clear of it at all. I think it's really, really useful. I'm all for making things accessible and making things simple. And if I have to draw a black mane, but I'm not allowed to use my black pencil, and I've got to use tons and tons of other colours in there, if I want to do that, that's great. But actually, if I can get exactly the same result by using a black pencil, then I will. I am a little bit lazy. But I'm all for just enjoying, really enjoying my drawings. That's what I want to do. I want to just be absolutely in love with what I'm doing. And if something goes a little bit wrong, I don't want to end up, you know, throwing a Thromby and getting all upset about it. I want to be able to have a calm head on my shoulders that I can actually work out how I can put it right again. And that to me is just stepping away from trying to get everything perfect all of the time. You know, I've got that it'll do attitude and it suited me just fine. So I'm just going to come up here very quickly. We've got a little bit more of a shadowy bit in there. You can see it's all really quite rough, but we're starting to get a really nice sort of shape coming through in here. And then I'm going to go back with my terracotta. And I'm going to come in over the top. It's going to lighten it up a little bit, but we're still going to get that nice depth and darkness in there. And then I'll probably bring a little bit of Indian red in. These darker shadows take a few more layers because you've just got to build that depth up. Build the depth up, but also get everything nicely blended and smoothed out and everything. You don't want lots of grain, you know, in the dark areas, but not in the light areas. I like to see the grain coming through where I need it, where it works really well. But in other areas where I want it to be nice and smooth, then you know, I'll kind of layer over the top of it until I get that sort of smoothness coming through. Again, I'm using these round pencil strokes, just adding the colour. I'd say areas like this where we're working into that really dark, shadowy bit, you are going to end up with a few more layers in here than up here. It's just that's just how it happens really, because when you put your dark colours in, you're going to get the grain back again. So then you need to put the lights in over the top to just get rid of that grain. So it's all about adding those layers in, and you know, kind of working towards that richness and the darkness that you want. So I would say I end up with more layers in these darker areas than I do in the lighter ones. Which might sound like, well, yeah, it would be like that, wouldn't it? But sometimes where it's like a really dark, like if we go up into the ear here, this is probably 2 layers, because it's a layer of, I think it was a layer of burnt sienna first, and then I just went straight in with the black, harder pressure, tiny little pencil strokes, got it all filled in black, and it's great, and it's given me exactly the right density that I wanted. Down here, because it's not just a solid colour, it's shadow, it's shape, it's a little bit darker in places than other places. We've got to just take our time with this and just work through it and work these colours in. And it's, you know, treating each step of the drawing a little bit differently, really. There are definitely areas where you can just get 1 or 2 layers in, and then there are areas where you really do need to spend a little bit more time. I've got a bit of a funny mark going on in there, which I'm trying to ignore. And I'm just going to bring that little cotton bud back in again. Oops. That's the only thing that I'm not overly... I don't use light fast pencils an awful lot, and it's because that's what happens. I find they just bring a little bit more, too much grain through. And then it's then sort of like a little bit harder to get rid of it, but this is working okay. I'm just sort of dotting it, I'm just helping it just soften a little bit. And then we need to come back in again. So that's the those are the colours that I've been using for predominantly for this particular horse. Those lovely sort of rich oranges, Indian red, those darker Mars blacks, the Caput Morton violets, that kind of thing. They've worked really well, and I think they look really nice, I think. So that's what I'm going to carry on here. I need to add a little bit more sort of red into here and up through there, and obviously work on the mane. But those are the colours that that I've used in this particular piece, and I hope that was useful.